Alright, so I'm recording this part here on my webcam because apparently I lost the intro due to an unforeseen circumstance, but this video is basically me telling you that Niantic has added Terrakion and Tier 5 raids in Pokemon Go. It's the new Gen 5 Legendary. It's part of the Swords of Justice along with Cobalion and Frisian, as well as Keldeo, which is technically not part of the trio, but it is still a member of the Swords of Justice. So this is basically my raid guide on how to beat Terrakion in Pokemon Go, and Terrakion's moves, stats, and information you need to know about Terrakion beforehand. So yeah, let's just get right into the video. Now Terrakion is a rock and fighting type Pokemon, like I just said, and it does get a pretty interesting coverage move here. If you look at its move pool, it does get its standard affair of rock, ground, and fighting type moves, but you can see its very interesting psychic type move in Zen Hit, but definitely functions as a very good coverage option. It's its fast move because fighting types do hit it super effective, so fighting types are all going to be weak to Zen Hit, but so things like your close combat Machamps or your dynamic punch Hariyamas or a dynamic punch Machamp, those are going to take super effective from Zen Headbutt, so you better want to watch out if you're facing a Zen Headbutt Terrakion in a raid. Earthquake is also a pretty neat coverage move here because Steel types hit it super effective as well, and Earthquake is a pretty important coverage move in order to hit the Steel types. Close Combat also does the same thing with the Steel types that not only hit Terrakion super effective but resist both of Terrakion's fast moves here. Unless your name is Metagross, you're very likely to be hit hard by the Close Combat if you are a Steel type, so you might want to be wary of sending your Steel types in on the Terrakion, especially if the Terrakion has Close Combat or Earthquake. Mostly Earthquake is the one you want to be worried about. Terrakion also has pretty respectable stats, very bulky, very offensive at 209 base HP, 260 base attack, but has a pretty mediocre defense of base 192. Very bulky, very physical, but not very good on the defensive front. Alright, so now that you know Terrakion's move pool a little bit, let's dive right into the counters right here. So Terrakion, being a rock and fighting type, has a crap load of resistances here. It's weak to fighting, it's weak to ground, it's weak to steel, fairy, what else have I missed? Psychic, water, and grass. That is a lot of weaknesses for you to take advantage of. In short, I will be grouping the counters into several groups here today, namely the fighting types, the ground and steel types, the psychic and fairy types, and the water and grass types. So in terms of your fighting types, you want to use your standard Machamp and Hariyama, preferably with Dynamic Punch, because that is going to do a lot here. Because Dynamic Punch is a pretty powerful move, it's going to do a lot of DPS, especially on a Machamp coming off a 182 attack at level 30. It's going to hit like a truck considering Machamp's stats. Hariyama is pretty much a tanky alternative to Machamp. If you want to be a bit more potion efficient, you can definitely consider a Hariyama over Machamp, but if you prefer the DPS, I highly suggest you using Machamp, or Heracross and Lucario especially come in at a very close second in terms of DPS here. Lucario, being a steel type, will take super effective from Earthquake, and like I said, send in your fighting types with caution because Terrakion gets a coverage fast move in Zen Headbutt, which is super effective on fighting types here. Now I just want to give honorable mentions to Blaziken and Ember, although they don't have the stats. I mean, Blaziken does have the stats and the DPS to show for it, but unfortunately it's a bit frail and it is weak to both Earthquake and Zen Headbutt. Ember is in a similar vein because it does have pretty decent-ish moves, pretty decent-ish stats, but it's just inferior to Blaziken here. The ground and steel types are pretty much going to be your basic ground and steel types, the ones you've always been using for raids, like Groudon, especially pretty meta relevant in raids as well as in PvP. Garchomps, especially with the Mudshot and Earthquake, pretty good in the ground type department. Excadrill with a bevy of movesets which I shall display right here. Metal Claw and Drill Run as well as Mud Slap and Drill Run, your two most recommended sets in my opinion. Excadrill is a pretty beast ground type here, but you might want to be careful of Close Combat as well as Earthquake because Excadrill is weak to both of those moves, and considering how frail it is, it's definitely going to get OHKO'd by Terrakion carrying either one of those moves. Now if you want a more bulky ground type alternative, Hippowdon will come and save your day. day. Although it doesn't have as much DPS as a Groudon or an Excadrill or a Garchomp, it is pretty tanky and should be able to do sustained damage over time. For the steel types, I would highly recommend your Metagross, especially with Meteor Mash, because it is such a phenomenal move. It's a community day move on Metagross, so it doesn't really have the accessibility. If you already have a Meteor Mash Metagross in your inventory right now with decent IVs and reasonably powered up, go ahead and whip out your Meteor Mash Metagross and use it here on the Terrakion. Other savvy players might also want to use a Dialga or a Jirachi that you have caught from raids and special research respectively, although Dialga and Jirachi are pretty inaccessible for the average player, being a legendary and a mythical respectively, so Metagross with Meteor Mash should be a more accessible alternative for those of you who have played on Beldum Community Day. Now on to the Psychic and Fairy type department. Of course we have the OG Psychic type Mewtwo. Now Mewtwo I know has received a lot of hype here, and here it is, having the DPS, having amazing stats to show for it, amazing DPS with Side Strike, as well as Focus Blast. It is one of the chart-topping Psychic types here on this counter list, but there are still other choices like Latios with Zen Hitbutt here. Pretty decent DPS, comparable to a Mewtwo, especially with Solar Beam and Solar Beam or Psychic as its charge move. You can also opt for a Gallade or a Gardevoir if you don't already have a Mewtwo, especially with the Psychic buff here. Synchronoise is now slightly inferior compared to Psychic. Gallade and Gardevoir, although inferior to Mewtwo, is still workable. Gardevoir is pretty underwhelming in terms of DPS here. Honorable mentions go out to Alakazam and Espeon for being very comparable to Mewtwo, especially Alakazam here with Confusion and Future Sight. A budget Mewtwo, I would say, if you don't already have a Side Strike Mewtwo or a decent Mewtwo powered up to a sufficient level. Espeon is pretty much a glass cannon, so you might want to use it sparingly. Apart from that, just use your Mewtwo's, Latioses, and yeah, you should be good. For your Fairy type counters, you can use a Gardevoir, like I've mentioned, with the following movesets that I will be listing right now once more. Confusion Psychic, Charm Psychic, or Confusion Dazzlingly would be your three best options here. If you don't have a Gardevoir, you can always opt for a Togekiss, which I know it's a Sinnoh evolution, but most of you should have gotten your Sinnoh by now, especially if you've got one from the Colossal Discovery Regigigas research, or if you've got one from PvP or a research breakthrough. But you should be careful of Terrakion's rock type moves because it is super effective on Togekiss. And last but not least, we have your water and grass types. Most of these here are going to be community day moves, especially Swampert and Feraligatr here with Hydro Cannon. Decent DPS, although you might want to go for a Kyogre if you really prefer the DPS, as well as a little bit more bulk. Kyogre has fantastic DPS in Waterfall, and Hydro Pump. Hydro Pump is by far one of the best water type moves in the game. Hydro Cannon is pretty spammable on the Swampert and the Feraligatr. Hydro Pump Kyogre is definitely one of the best water types in terms of DPS, as you can see. Another Hydro Pump user that's pretty viable here would be Gyarados. Gyarados does have the stats. It has a higher attack stat than both Swampert and Feraligatr. With access to Hydro Pump and Outrage, it can hit like a truck here. Kyogre and Gyarados, maybe even Swampert as well, are going to do a lot on a Terrakion. You might want to be careful with some of these grass types as they are weak to Zen Hitbutt here, like Roserade and Venusaur with Frenzy Plant, Roserade with Solar Beam or Grass Knot here, as well as Venusaur with Vine Whip Frenzy Plant or Razor Leaf Frenzy Plant. They're Heart Poison types, so they're weak to Psychic type moves, IEs and Hitbutts in this case. You might want to put them in the back seat for now. Roserade especially. Use Roserade sparingly because it is a glass cannon. Instead, use the following grass types, which I shall mention right now. So if you want more fast and hard-hitting offense, you should definitely opt for a Sceptile or a Leafeon. Sceptile with the Frenzy Plant is going to hit like a truck here. Has similar DPS to Venusaur, so if you don't already have a Venusaur powered up, Frenzy Plant Sceptile, it's a pretty good substitute for a Frenzy Plant Venusaur. A Leafeon with Leaf Blade is also a pretty good alternative, although slightly inferior to Sceptile. Pretty comparable Pokemon to Sceptile, although it fares slightly worse in meeting a Terrakion. Now, if you want more bulk in your grass types, you should definitely opt for a Tangrowth because it is pretty tanky. It can soak up a little more hits than a Venusaur can, especially when it's not weak to Psychic type attacks rather than Zen Hitbutt. Torterra here, although it has slightly lower attack than a 10 growth, it does have access to Frenzy Plant, which is a very, very spammable grass type move. It's a Community Day move that Torterra recently got on Turtwig Community Day. You might also want to use Earthquake because it is pretty viable as well, but otherwise use your Frenzy Plant Torterras. However, I would recommend you use your Sceptiles as well as your Venusaurs and your Roserades because those are your 3 hardest hitting grass types on a Terrakion. Alright, so now that we got all the counters out of the way, let's discuss Terrakion's 100% CPs. Terrakion has a pretty high 100% CP at 2113 for level 20, which is in non-weather boosted conditions, and 2641 at level 25, which is in weather boosted conditions, i.e. cloudy and partly cloudy weather. You want to watch out for the weather if you want to use Terrakion in the Ultra League, because Terrakion at level 25 will definitely go over the 2500 mark for Ultra League, so it's definitely not eligible anymore if your Terrakion is weather boosted, so you might want to aim for a non-weather boosted Terrakion if you want to use it in the Ultra League. More details on the Ultra League sets later on in the video, so stay tuned. But anyway, let's focus a bit more on the weather effects on Terrakion's moves, as well as your strategy in defeating Terrakion here. So in sunny weather, you want to bring out your ground types, as well as your grass types, your Groudons, your Sceptiles, your Venusaurs, your Roserades, and the like. Of course, in cloudy weather, it still has some benefits because it boosts your fighting type as well as fairy type moves that are super effective on Terrakion here. So yeah, bring out your fighting types, your Machaps, as well as your fairy types, Gardevoir and Togekiss in cloudy weather here. Now if it is raining in your area currently, and it is raining weather in-game, bring out your Kyogres because water types are boosted in this weather. And if you live in an area with snow or with frequently snowy weather, now is a good time to bring out your Steel types because Steel types are really boosted heavily, especially Metagross with Meteor Mash. Really, really good to use in snowy weather. And if you live in a very windy area, bring out your Psychic types because Psychic types are boosted by windy weather. Well, with all that in mind, Terrakion isn't actually that hard to beat at all in Pokemon Go. With the right counters powered up, preferably above level 35, you should be pretty good to go with 2 people, but if you need more people, a group of 6 on average should be enough to beat a Terrakion in Pokemon Go. 6 trainers about level 30 with the right counters, powered up to about level 30, yeah, and you should be good to go. So that's all the basic info you need to know about Terrakion. I just want to quickly go over how you might want to use Terrakion in Ultra League here for just a little bit. Unfortunately, Terrakion does not have much bulk, so it's not going to last very long, basically. Unlike Cobalion, unlike Giratina, Terrakion is pretty much a very niche pick here for the flying types, as well as some of the fighting types that, you know, you might want to catch off guard, like Machamp. Like maybe even Tyranitar, you might want to catch off guard with an Earthquake. Looking at its charge moves, most of them are 1-bar charge moves, which don't really fare very well in PvP. So yeah, you would expect them to have like really, really long charge times. Smackdown especially has a long animation time, so yeah, it's unfortunately not very viable compared to like Giratina and the very prevalent beasts you see in Ultra League. So yeah, it's kind of like, you know, mediocre at best. Rock Slide is a 2-bar charge move, but yeah, it's pretty underwhelming in PvP. So yeah, that's basically your one-stop video guide to Terrakion in Pokemon Go. Hopefully I've made this video comprehensive enough, and hopefully this is all the info you'll ever need, and at least until Niantic gives us an update here in Pokemon Go. So yeah, that basically brings me to the end of this video here. I know, abrupt endings. Yeah, so this has been TaeganAdventures. I'm gonna sign out right now, so yeah, peace out, and I shall see you in the next video.